Today we're going to have a lesson on one of the most famous tremolo pieces in the classical guitar repertoire. And what I'll do in the video is I'm just going to say a few brief words first, and then I'll run through the piece for you so you can hear it. And then we'll dive into a deeper and more in-depth lesson where I go through the piece along with you. Follow the lesson for free and just pick up all the tips from the video. But if you're interested, I do have a sheet music edition of this work. There's a link for that in the description. Also on the post, I've also included a number of super high-level professional performances of the piece, so make sure you go check out those amazing performances as well. But like I said, I will do a run-through performance for you. When it comes to tremolo pieces like this, the important thing to realize is that the repeated notes are actually the melody. And although in this piece, that bass line is has some melodic contour and is certainly interesting from a harmonic standpoint, it is just kind of an accompanimental figure or a secondary figure. It kind of just does the same thing over and over while the melody is in that top voice. So when you're thinking of tremolo pieces, you're thinking of the top note you're thinking of that top note as the melody. And the aspect of a repeated note is to give the illusion of sustain in that voice. So you have this sustaining melody. You know, if a violin player was playing a single note with a long bow stroke, you would just hear a continuous note. And the idea is that that repeated note would give the impression of sustain. That's the effect. So the melody is actually in that upper voice. And when you go over this piece and you're practicing it, it's really recommended that, you know, maybe just play the top note as a quarter note. You know, and think of that as the melody and get used to listening to that as the melody and putting that in your ear. And although this lower voice is interesting, and you can make it interesting, it is not the primary purpose of the piece, because that bum 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 just happens again and again through the entire piece. Like, that can't be a melody. It's just too repetitive, right? It's just accompanimental. It's interesting, but it's not the primary objective. So that's just like some brief conceptual information about tremolo, and that's certainly the challenge, is trying to play that upper voice as a beautiful melody. And it's challenging. I certainly find tremolo quite challenging, but that's the goal. Like I said, I have tremolo lessons on the site. You can check that out. And you want to work on your tremolo technique, your scales and arpeggios. You know, if you have your scales and arpeggios with all finger combinations in order, then your tremolo technique will probably be somewhat in order. But you can also practice tremolo exercises to refine that skill. But you must have a balanced technique already, and you've worked your way up with some other pieces. One thing I found really useful when practicing this piece is to just get rid of the tremolo sometimes and just play the piece without the tremolo and fix things like that. You know, and learn the chord shapes and practice it in super relaxed way. Sometimes when you're playing tremolo for a really long time, you might realize that you're like squeezing with the left hand, you're doing all sorts of weird things. So, you know, learn the piece without the tremolo and see if you can learn the chord shapes in a nice and relaxing way. Go through the whole piece like that and really learn it in a really calm fashion without the tremolo, so that you can kind of just separate those things. You're not having to like play tremolo and get tendinitis but when you're learning the entire piece here. The other thing, of course, like I said at the beginning of the lesson, practice that melody on its own. And you can just turn it into like quarter notes and make sure that you have a sense of that melody really in your ear a lot. So yeah, you can practice the technique of tremolo and your scales and arpeggios, and you can practice the chord shapes and the piece itself without tremolo to learn it in a relaxed way. And you can also practice the melody on its own, and then you can bring all those things together, smush them together, and then you have the piece. I think that's the most effective way to probably work on the work. If you're just trying to like play the piece constantly with tremolo, it can be a very long process and very difficult. So you want to break it up and practice it in different. Make sure you're at the level to play this work. It's quite advanced. It's really recommended that you play some easier tremolo pieces or some pieces with small tremolo sections in it before you start tackling a larger work. That can help with endurance and also give you an opportunity to work on the technique in a more gentle setting instead of struggling away. If you're struggling away with the left hand fingering and the tremolo at the same time, those two things will be very challenging. So make sure you've checked out those other easier works. I'll link to a few in the description. Okay, I think we can start going through the work. It starts off with that accompanimental bass line. I'll go a little slower with the tremolo, so it might sound a little funny, but I can talk this way. Not too much to discuss yet. Most of these E's just so I have a little bit more control over the texture and the open strings aren't ringing out too wildly when possible. I think it gives it a little bit more of a uniform sound when you're closing those E's. And then you glissando up, and then you repeat the same material. Changes here. There's a number of shifts like that in the piece. Just when you're doing it, just make sure you like prepare your finger in over the string that needs to be played, and then when you shift, you just kind of like quickly move down, but your finger's already in place. So don't be just out of whack and then try to throw your hand into there. You really, as you're playing the tremolo, prepare your finger and then shift down and get that note. So from that measure 29 there, let's see. So preparing that finger. This is a little bit challenging, but you can lock those fingers in. That's a bit of a stretch, but it's stable because you can lock all the fingers in, and then you just have one finger that you have to reach out and get that note with. But I admit that it's definitely a little bit challenging to reach that. Places too where the phrasing kind of ends and you can just do a calm shift. So don't try to stress out shifting up in some of these places. Just combine it with the phrasing and do a nice calm shift. Keep your fourth finger down throughout all of this. So really really calming, almost like having the stability of the fourth finger down that entire time, right? You might find it kind of weird to cross over the third finger here, but I did it because that way you could hold on to that to the last minute. And you always have that free available finger to go down on whatever note is coming next. So it might seem like a pretty strange little fingering, but I think it really works well. You can always just grab the next thing. And then we're into the E major section here. The E major section is kind of a relief because it turns to major and it kind of just feels a little bit more relaxed and less intense. But there's some challenging stretches in here and lots of bar chords. And at this point, you're getting a little bit tired, and so endurance is an issue, and accuracy, starts to come into play as well along with the endurance. I certainly find by the last page I'm starting to get a little bit out of whack. So it's important to make sure you're finding relaxation points throughout the piece. You're not getting tension built up and built up and built up, but instead you're releasing it often. And when the mood relaxes, like in this, that's a very relaxing little opening. Just try to relax your body, regain some control as well. Some tricky shifts there. Jump the second finger there. So you just try to smooth it out as much as possible. Stuff is coming up here. This is a particular stretch in the piece. I don't know, maybe it depends on the size of your hands, but I definitely find this to be a little bit of a strain. But again, it's relatively stable because of the fingers you get to fix down. You get to fix the first finger and get that note, so those ones are easy to reach. And then you just have this one finger to tuck in, so there's tons of stability despite the awkward stretch. And then the audience always claps, but then you still have a final chord to play. That happens a lot. Yeah, so challenging piece. So you need to make sure that you have your tremolo under control. And like I said like I've said in many of my tremolo lessons, if your scales and arpeggios are under control, then your tremolo will be under control as well. You need, if you've gone over a wide variety of scales and arpeggios with all the fingering combinations, then your hand is probably organized and you'll be able to play tremolo. Also go over tremolo exercises to correct and hone the skill. But it's really about your overall technique being ready for it, and you can check out some of those lessons on that. But that's my main advice, is like make sure you're ready for the tremolo technique and that your scales and arpeggios with all finger combinations are under control. And then work on tremolo exercises to refine the technique itself. But it's really a combination of having, everything a little bit balanced in your technique. So you work on your technique and your tremolo technique, and you've played some easier pieces before that include some tremolo sections, maybe like that Vignes piece that I linked to in the description, has a little tiny tremolo section in it. That's a great, starter piece to practice your skills with tremolo before taking on a gigantic piece like this and such a famous piece. Then calmly go through and learn the piece like we've discussed. And then the challenge from there is building in relaxation and endurance and trying to make the piece special and, not let it, be stressful or anything like that. But I think all those things I said about technique and building your way up through other pieces means that by the time you play this piece, you'll be ready for it. And then you can just slowly, methodically work on it.